Hey, everybody. It's good to see you. It's great to be here. So we're in a Leviticus series. If you're newer to our community, does that stress you out? It stresses me out. I was trying to tell somebody, they used to be a part of our church. They moved to another state, and they're like, what are you guys talking about right now? And I was like, Leviticus, but I promise it's not weird. And maybe you're kind of coming into this series going, okay, like, are we going to do like, what is this going to be? Am I going to feel like sad every Sunday or like I don't even know, like all that stuff? And so I recognize that may be where you are. So we're coming into a series like this in a lot of different ways. We've been in it for a couple weeks. How's everybody doing? Great. Okay, you're in? Okay, great. So one of the things that we started with at the very beginning is if we're going along in something that I say or in something that we're reading in the passage and it feels like it's going to trip you up, then we just say landmine. And it's like, hey, we don't want to step on that and kind of send us out of the room because we're spiraling or we're confused or whatever. And so literally just interrupt me and raise your hand and say landmine, and then we'll have that conversation. It may be I'm able to answer it in the moment. It may be I have no idea, I'll get back to you. Or it may be I'm getting to it later in the time. Or it may be that's a long conversation, let's go to coffee. Okay? So we'll do some version of that. But for sure, participate. We want you in. As I was talking even to Janet, my wife, this week about how the Leviticus series is going, she had a dream about Leviticus. And so that sounds scary, even in itself. And it's like, okay, was that a nightmare or exactly what was going on? She dreams all the time and loves telling me her dreams. And she said, okay, so I had a dream and we're on our way to a church retreat. But it wasn't just our regular church retreat that we go to every year. This is a specific church retreat where we were going to be doing rehearsals every day for Leviticus the musical. I'm not kidding. Any musical theater fans in the house? Okay, all right, so you're on board with Leviticus the musical, okay? And so literally, she's like walking me through like all of the different parts of her dream and all this stuff. Chad was gonna direct it, and she's so excited. Chad was fired up, and she's talking to me about this one particular song, and she was like, I was trying to write it down as soon as I woke up because I didn't want to forget it because it was actually really good. And I was like, did you want to write it down because you want to do a Leviticus musical? I was like confused, but she said it was all about setting up the tabernacle, and it was like pulling the pole and like doing the thing and all this, and she was like, but it was like super peppy, and I was like, time out. Right? Please at least tell me that in the middle of this song that there's like a tap dance break, like straight up in the middle. And she was like, absolutely 100% there was. So I don't know if that's going to happen. That would be the weirdest, I guess, most awesome thing ever. But that's at least how Leviticus is hitting Janet. She's dreaming about the musical that we're not going to do. So if you're newer to our community, yes, we do it kind of like that around here. But we also have a book for you. And for those of you who have been through the whole series, again, keep one of these close by. Take the one in front of you, or if you already have one, get it out even to look at it. It has some of the main terminology that we're even going to be talking about today. There's a layout for the tabernacle space and kind of all that. We'll get to that a little bit later. But again, this is a great guide to help with just even understanding some of the vast complexities of what's going on. All right, so with that, we're actually going to start at the beginning. And I know we're in week 3 of the series, but we're going to start in chapter 1 because we want to talk specifically today about the first 3 sacrifices that we see, the first 3 offerings. Now, these are what's called voluntary offerings. Last week, Chad talked specifically about the required offerings, the obligatory offerings. And now we're going to back up and we're going to go through the ones that it's like, you don't have to do these, but you get to, okay? And that may feel weird, but we want to talk that out. And one of the questions that I've had, and this is like my own landmine that I've been thinking about through the series, is what was everybody else doing during this time? I'm always a big like context person. I want to know contextually, like where this falls in history, like where does this fall geographically, like what are the conversations of the day, so to speak. So I did some research on that, and it turns out that the other people groups around everybody that's in kind of the Sinai region right here, so like North Africa and the Middle East, like the Fertile Crescent, kind of all that space is where this is happening, that the other people groups in the Sinai region at that time were also sacrificing. They were sacrificing animals. They were sacrificing grain offerings, kind of like some of the stuff that we're even going to see today. And so what was happening was very similar to what we see in Leviticus. Like there's actually a Hittite text. They have a tablet of it. It's like from 1300 BC. And it talks specifically about how it is that they're supposed to go through a sacrifice. It sounds a lot like Leviticus. But what's beautiful is the way that God sets up the system specific to what they would have already understood and recapitulates it into a greater understanding, a richer, more full understanding, to remove all of these pretender gods that have been doing all this other stuff and to say, I'm the one true God. Here's how you can know it. Here's how you can be set apart in doing some things that have these echoes of what everybody else is up to, but I'm going to change it so that I am put on display, so that you were put on display. And not just that, but so that we get a revolutionary concept of relationship. So in the day, in the ancient Near East, the stories went along this way, that there was the cosmos that was created by all of these gods, and outside of all of that, there wasn't really much. And so in this cosmos, they create Earth. And then they realize that they're hungry, and so they till gardens. And they make food, and then they bring along livestock. And so they're eating and they're doing all this stuff. They get kind of bored and tired of doing that after a while, and they realize that they can just kind of lay back in the lap of luxury and create humanity to be a version of a slave labor force. And so now the job of humanity is not to live so much as it is to take care of the gods, the pretender gods. And so the rain would happen so that the grass would grow, so that they could get plants and people would be able to eat those, and livestock would eat that, and then they would offer the grain, the drinks, and the animals as a way to feed the gods. And so this has become known among theologians as the great symbiosis. And so in the middle of a story that everybody would have had a regular kind of understanding about of, oh yeah, you do sacrifices because the gods are hungry and they need it to live. Or the gods can get really frustrated and mad, and so we need to appease them and keep them on our team and on our side, and to keep the rain happening so that there isn't a drought and we all die and starve and do all of this other stuff. And so this symbiotic relationship is what God enters into with this particular people group, the Israelites, and says, I'm going to take a common understanding that everybody has in the region, and I'm going to turn it. And I'm going to have it point both to me now, but I'm going to have it point to something else in the future. And that's what we get to see in Leviticus. So Leviticus chapter 1, let's start with the first voluntary offering. And remember, these weren't the you gotta's, these were the if you want to's, okay? Verse 3, if the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, okay, so like cattle, you're to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance of the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. You were to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. Now, let's pause. There's a lot of different ways that theologians have looked back at specifically this idea of placing one's hand on the animal, and it ranges from showing ownership, this is really mine, to this is actually going in my stead, in my place, to it's actually doing some kind of spiritual act. Okay? Now, what we see is all of those happening in different sacrifices along the way throughout Leviticus in these first 5 chapters, in first 7 chapters, actually. But what we see right here is this idea of atonement is a point forward. It's a way to say, I am saying that this animal is going to make right something that's been broken. Okay? Verse 5, you're to slaughter the young bull before the Lord, and then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance of the tent of meeting. There's a couple things here that feel really important. I was reading this week, and the person who was writing this particular study guide for Leviticus was saying worship was a spectator sport. The person bringing the bull, the person bringing the goat, the person bringing the pigeon, whatever it would be, had to actually do the killing. And then it was given to the priests. And there's a way in which, as we come in, right out the gate in these voluntary offerings, again, it starts with the voluntary. And again, this would go against culture that says, you've got to, okay? And God says, yeah, we're going to get to the got yous, but right now, you get to. You get to bring this to me as a way for us to build relationship, as a way for us to do all these things. And you have a part to play in it. It's a gnarly part. But sacrifice has got the cost. It's going to cost this animal its life, and it's going to cost you cleanliness. Like you're going to get bloody. You're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to do this yourself. And so what we see is that worship gets to be not just a spectator sport, but fully participatory. And we get to do that now. Like hopefully you're not just sitting in a chair for the movie that's happening up here in front of you, but you're a participant in not only what's going on right now with your thoughts, with your journaling, with your, hey, landmine, but you're talking about it afterward. You're talking about it tomorrow. You're considering it. You're praying into, God, what would you have for me? It continues to be a way in which we get to do this together. Verse 6. You're to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priests, are to put a fire on the altar and arrange the wood. Like there was all these really specific ways that all of this had to be done. Again, just to showcase how different God was. Then, oh yeah.
So if the whole idea was that God himself doesn't necessarily need the offerings,
Yeah.
theoretically that means that he never actually needed them in the first place.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. Can somebody say that?
It's not, so with the offerings, God himself doesn't necessarily need them. It's
Yeah.
just a way to cross relationship with the Israelites and to prepare the way for Jesus eventually. But if he doesn't necessarily need them, why are they so specific?
Why are they what?
Specific.
So specific?
Does that not necessarily create a problematic way of having too many parallels to like the Greek gods at the time, which is very taboo as well, and you don't want to have so much emulating that?
That's a great question. All right, so for those of you online and for those of us that couldn't hear that very well, I'm sorry, you guys are going to have to yell loud because I don't have my hearing aids today. I'm deaf if you didn't know, and I typically wear hearing aids, but I can't with like this hooky thing. It doesn't work well. The question for online and for everybody else, and let's help me make sure I get this right, but it's basically, why so specific if it was offered as a voluntary sacrifice anyway? Like, why did God need it to be like following all of these rules? Is that a way to distill it?
Yeah, it just seems very, very similar
Yeah.
to like what you were saying with the 10 gods
Right.
that their followers do, but we also know that God didn't want us to have the same relationship with him as they did with those other gods.
Totally.
Why does it sound so similar if it's also super stupid?
Great question. Yeah. I don't know fully. Here's a couple of things that just immediately kind of come to mind, and then for sure let's talk about it more. Part of the reason for the specificity was to call attention to God as different than all of these pretender gods. Okay, so and I've gone on rants about this before, and I don't know how far this is going to get into a rabbit trail. I talk about how iTunes destroyed music, and it's because like I love records and I love the idea of sitting and listening to a whole concept album together and how it's telling one beautiful story and all this. But we started buying songs individually and downloading individual songs, and we lost the beauty of an album. And I think that there is at least some way, and I don't know if this is a good parallel or not. The distinctives that God was trying to create with saying, do it like this, was to showcase how different he is, how other he is, instead of just taking in some of the pieces that we like, some of the pieces that we're cool with, just grabbing one song and those two other songs that I don't really like on the album I don't have to deal with, but taking in the whole concept of who God is and who we get to be in relationship with him. That's a really beautiful opportunity for God to be put on display in different ways. And for us to put God on display in different ways than maybe we would even consider what we'd like. Have you ever had a situation where you're like, I think I understand this about God, but I don't know that I love it, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I think instead of us just kind of curating our own God, what God says is, I'm the one who sets a standard. And my standard is this. It can feel nuts and it can feel out of control and so wild and so laborious and all of this, but I have my reasons. You're going to understand some of them. And so this isn't just me going, you'll understand later, but it's also, you'll understand later. And we'll talk about that at the very end. Great question. So, as we get through this whole burnt offering in the first section, one of the things that I want to point out specifically in chapter 1 is this idea that this first sacrifice, the burnt offering, was an expression of devotion. So right out the gate, God is giving us, he's giving the Israelites back in the day, the opportunity to go, God, we pick you. We pick how hard this is. We pick all of the details and all of the ways in which we're going to have to go about this. We pick that it has to be the best sacrifice that we can possibly give you, the one without blemish, the one that would be the most expensive if I was going to be able to sell this inside the community. I am choosing you over and against all of that. I pick you. And so right out the gate, we see again, God doing a revolutionary thing among the people to say, it's not simply about appeasement. It's not simply about just trying to live or to feed me. But instead, you get to say, of your own volition, I choose you, God. Psalm 50, I think, illustrates this in a really beautiful way. Starting in verse 9. I have no need for a bull from your stall or goats from your pens, for every animal in the forest is mine and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains and the insects in the field are mine. If I were hungry, would I not tell you that the world is mine and all that's in it? Do I eat flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? I've always read this passage like, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and I've always thought about it as him being rich and not having any need for us like that. But he is literally speaking to the great symbiosis of the day, where all of these other pretender gods are being fed at an altar. God's going, I don't need any of that stuff. And I'm the only God that's real. And I want to call that out. I want to draw attention to that with the illustration of the tabernacle. So go ahead and pull that up really quickly. And this is just like some of us are visual learners, and so this can be helpful. So everything that we're talking about is happening right here. So this is where the sacrifice would have been made and where it would have been burnt up. You would have killed the animal, and some tables over here, and then walked it over here to be able to do this. Is this where God's presence was in this scenario? No. Where's God's presence? All the way over here in the most holy place. So even in the very visualization and the way in which this was going, God is saying, I'm not like those fake gods. All of these other gods that have to, these people prepare a dinner table for them and then serve up this animal, I don't need it. That's not what we're doing. Beautiful. Second, grain offering. Leviticus chapter 2. One of the things that is beautiful about the next one, the grain offering, again, this is a voluntary offering, is the gratitude and praise that's good to go along with it. So verse 2, when anyone brings a grain offering to the Lord, their offering is to be of the finest flour. They're to put olive oil on it and incense in it. And I want to pause here and talk about the different ingredients because they really matter. Who loves the Great British Baking Show? Oh, can we talk about that's a good sponge? This is what's going on here, you guys. You want to talk about the best baking? That's what's going down. The finest flour. Again, the idea of this is going to cost you something. If you're bringing this, and it's an if, you don't have to bring it, but if you're going to bring it, bring me the best. And then this idea of pouring olive oil over it is very different than what would have been the current culture of the day and what is the culture of most of us in baking, that the olive oil would go in it. It would be in the dough and be mixed in and all of that. But it has all of these notions of it just makes it more bougie. Honestly, it makes it fancier that the olive oil was poured over the top than it was just simply in it. And so this gets to be a representation of this is an extravagance. This is a beautiful thing that I'm getting to give God right now. And when we pour it on, it also has the notion of anointing, that kings were anointed with oil and all of this. And this is just another way of putting God in his rightful spot and on display. And then the spice that gets thrown in there, most scholars believe that it was frankincense. And we know frankincense, when it was given by the sages, when they present their gifts to Jesus, to say, this is special, it's beautiful, it smells so fragrant. And so all of a sudden, you get to bring a baked good to God that is the best. Now, we keep reading. Verse 2, and take it to Aaron's son, the priest, and the priest shall take a handful of flour and the oil together with the incense and burn it as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, an aroma that's pleasing to the Lord. Verse 3, the rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, and the most holy part of the food offerings presented to the Lord. Now, the first one, everything is burnt up. And if you go through the rest of chapter 1, the different parts are talked about, what you do with the different parts, all of it is burned up. Here, there's a portion of the dough and the bread that's taken and put on the fire and burned up, but then the rest is for the priest to be able to enjoy their family. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but consider what the priest is doing all day long. Killing animals, witnessing killing animals, building a fire, keeping a fire lit, splashing blood on stuff, talking to people about like whatever it is that's going on with them and all that. That is a long day, and they just set up the whole thing, and they're gonna have to take it down when the cloud moves, and they're gonna have to go somewhere else inside this desertous environment. On and on and on and on and on. And at the end of the day, for them to be able to bring home the best sponge that's possible and to go, family, children, everyone, gather around. This was someone's offering today to God. And we get to participate in their offering, but it also gets to be our sustenance. And it's not just like the off stuff, it's the best. What a beautiful way of God setting systems up to be able to care for the priests because they didn't have land. They couldn't farm and like make their own flour and do all that kind of stuff because they were to have every bit of their heart, mind, soul, and hands dedicated to all of the service of the Lord. And so God says, I'm going to take care of you, but I'm not going to take care of you with just like the low-grade stuff. You're going to get the most awesome bread. And then we come to chapter 3, the fellowship offering. Chapter 3, starting in verse 1. If your offering is a fellowship offering, now I just want to pause right there because again, we can't do this as well as it would have been done. But again, in the ancient Near East during this time period, everyone is terrified of the deities. They're always trying to figure out if they're on the good side or the bad side of the deity, if they're going to get struck or if they're not. Like all of this is transpiring all of the time. And all of a sudden right here, again, God is providing a way for fellowship. So even that right there is just so mind-blowing for this entire community, and not just them, but for everybody going, wait, your God wants to like hang with you? Yes. So continuing in verse 1. And you offer an animal from the herd, whether male or female, and present it to the Lord, and you do all of this. You were to lay a hand on the head. And again, we've gone through all that. Verse 3, from the fellowship offering, you were to bring food, and then it gets into all of the specifics, the internal organs, the fat, which would have been seen in the day as delicacies. You're to burn all of that up. But then what about the rest of the animal? Well, the rest of the animal in this situation was given back to the person that brought it. So you bring the animal, you're in charge, like there's full body worship involved. You actually have to kill this animal. You give it to the priest. The priest does all of their stuff of taking the animal apart, doing all these things, burning those parts, and then you're given back the meat to be able to take back with your family now to enjoy. And again, think about the generational environment that's taking place here. You have multiple generations living in one space, sitting around one table, and whoever it was that was in charge of dinner that night gets to talk about how what we're eating was given to the Lord, and there's a way in which we get to participate in a meal with God together. So not only is this voluntary offering, and not only does it showcase this idea of all of the ways in which God wants to be with them, but then they get to celebrate that as well. So the fellowship offering is seen all throughout the Old Testament associated with festivals. And you can see why. It's like basically, let's have an incredible barbecue and talk about how awesome Yahweh is. And that's what's going on. So how is it that we move from Leviticus to start considering Jesus? Well, here's something that I was thinking about on the way here this morning. I have never spent a ton of time in Leviticus. I've never preached out of Leviticus, so a lot of this is even new study for me. And at first I was pretty freaked out about it. I was like, oh gosh, like what are we gonna do with Leviticus? Well, apparently we're gonna do a musical, which is gonna be helpful. But what I keep discovering is how readily available Jesus is in all these passages when we're looking for him. And I started thinking about like the Where's Waldo books. And you've got like all of the things that are red and white striped. And you think, oh, and then it's like, no, that's not Waldo. That's just like a candy cane or whatever. Like there's all these things, right? And then eventually you find Waldo. What I am realizing, the longer that I'm spending time in Leviticus, is that it's the reverse. Waldo is everywhere. Jesus is all over these places, and they all point to him if we have the lens to be able to go, Jesus, where are you? And so again, this is invitational. If you're newer to the Bible, if you're new to faith, if you're just checking all this stuff out and you're like, I thought Leviticus was a book where like there's like a lot of people dying and like all these capital punishment reasons and all that stuff. Yeah, it's there and we'll get to that. But also recognize that all over this is Jesus. And if you're like, I don't see it, then let's hang out. We get to do this together. That's what this is for. So what were some of the sacrifices that Jesus voluntarily offers? Here's just a handful. He left the presence of God. And I know that we tend to think about yeah, he left heaven to come to earth. And I think that somewhere along the way it got translated to he left like a really awesome eternal day spa where there was like all the time golf and came to earth where there was no golf courses and like you don't get a massage ever. And I think that sometimes we think about Jesus leaving heaven and coming to earth in some of those ways. But guys, do you realize that in some beautiful way of the dance of the Trinity, that Jesus was in the presence of God all the time? That's what eternity is about. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to do stuff and all that, and heaven is great. But the only reason that heaven is great is because God's there. And so all of a sudden, Jesus leaves the presence of God and comes to earth. And he does it voluntarily on his own. He chose poverty and humility. He didn't leverage his divinity for his own gain. And so this gets into the stuff that we kind of think about. It's like heaven was really rad, and then he comes down to earth where it's not so rad, and all that stuff. But he could have, and I got thinking about this week and going, he could have actually lived a perfect life and also been a really successful businessman. He could have had a really nice house. He could have been really well respected in the community. But instead, he chooses ways that will continue to confuse everybody else. Oh, so instead of him being a really good businessman and people going, well, that's why he has a following, is because he's like a really good businessman. No. And in all of these ways, he chooses a life of humility. He chooses a life of poverty. But then he also doesn't leverage it in ways that would feel weird either. I think, again, for me, sometimes I think that we can translate somewhere along the way that he's kind of like side hustling his God parts to where he's like the undercover boss from heaven. And so he puts on the undercover boss stuff to like do the thing during the day and be like, oh, I'm sad and I don't have any authority around here. And then at night goes and sleeps in his great bed and like does all this stuff. Jesus is not our undercover boss that's pretending to be something. Jesus fully emptied himself of his divinity. This is what we see in Scripture, and took on the very likeness of humanity. And in so doing, gives us a way to have escape. And he lays all that down on his own. He did that. All of the moments that he voluntarily held his tongue when people lied about him, that he chose humility when he could have put people in their place. He stopped what he was doing to genuinely see people and love them well, and so on and so on and so on. The Gospels are replete with ways in which Jesus voluntarily sets himself low and makes sacrifices. And obviously, ultimately, he voluntarily gave his life as the final once-for-all sacrifice. We read in John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. My sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen, and I must bring them in also. They too will listen to my voice, and they shall be one flock with one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay my life down only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I voluntarily do this. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. I command and receive from my Father. You guys, Jesus is incredible. And it's from this place that we get to talk about our own voluntary offerings. What do we get to give? Everything. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. This is out of the Message translation. Chad read it last week. Our life group this past week had a really incredible conversation around these couple of verses and what it can mean. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you, take your everyday, ordinary life, you're sleeping, eating, going to work, walking life around, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants you to do and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down into its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. And so when I start thinking about all of these offerings, all of these ways that we can do it, and maybe you're like me, we can get pretty quickly paralyzed into, I got to bring the best. I have to bring a perfect sacrifice. I'm so stressed out. Like, are my prayers actually good enough? Like, did I use the right vocabulary word? Did I pick up the phone and hang it up in the right way? Like, did God even hear me? When I came to worship, like, did I have on the right clothes? Like, did I say the right word? Did I stand up or sit down at the right time? Like, we can all of a sudden start getting caught up in some of the mechanisms and some of the ways in which these voluntary offerings get to be offered up to God. And an analogy came to me as we were cleaning out our garage over the last couple of weeks. We've been going through bins and just kind of getting rid of a bunch of old stuff that we've had lying around and whatever. And there were a couple of bins specifically that had a bunch of stuff from our daughter, Natalie, who's 21 now. And it had to do a lot with when she was young and all this stuff. And I started realizing, oh man, I think I see Jesus in Leviticus with this. And it's like this. Natalie made this for me for my birthday. I could have, when she handed me this with all of her smiles, I could have gone, thanks, Natalie, I have a few notes. Right? Okay? Because if I'm choosing to see her voluntary offering in the ways of, if you don't do it exactly like this, then it's unacceptable to me. I'm not God, and so God gets to do that. But for me, what I get to do is I get to say, babe, I love you so much, and I'm going to put this on my fridge. And we're going to celebrate you, the love that you have, and your beautiful artistic ability, and how it is that you're developing as a kiddo, and thank you. Or then this one of Goatee Jesus with a rainbow jacket. Again, she did this in Sunday school one day. And, we could have talked about the theological implications of did Jesus have a goatee or not. There's a lot of things that we could have done here. But instead, being able to see this as a genuine offering from someone to say, I love you, Jesus. Or this one, we went through a pretty big anime phase at our house. And so there's this is a little girl. This is Natalie. She happens to be wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt. And it says, pray, pray, pray all over it. And it says, I love you. And God takes this little drawing from a little girl and says, that is incredible. I have the biggest fridge that you can possibly imagine. And your voluntary offering of praise right now, I'm going to put on my fridge. And then lastly, she had a school project, and it was called My Daddy. And there's a part that asks some questions that she has to fill in, and then she also gets to give an additional description for what's kind of going on. So this is what my daughter wrote about me. My dad's name is Brian. His eyes are brown and his hair is brown. It actually used to be brown. Yeah. And then here's the next line. He is 30 feet tall and weighs 104 pounds. There's a few other details about me that don't really matter. But then over on this side where she gets to riff and actually talk about some of these objective truths about me, and everything over here is relational. She says, he tells people about Jesus and we talk about Jesus. He takes me to Disney. He gets firewood. I have no idea. I don't know. But I think a lot of times we think that we need to have it all figured out to offer our worship. We need to be in a totally good spot before we sing our guts out. We need to make sure that our theology is dialed so that we can. And what I want you to consider is the greatest theological work that you can think of right now. The most beautiful and poetic prayer that has ever been offered up. God, you are 30 feet tall and 104 pounds. God, you are infinite. And you are all-knowing. And yet it still doesn't get to who God actually is. We were talking about it in the debrief, and the passage came up. No mind has conceived. Use the greatest words that are at our disposal. Use multiple languages if you want. Get all of it in there, and it still reads, God is 30 feet tall and weighs 104 pounds. And yet, God takes it, and he's like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. I am not 30 feet tall, and I do not weigh 104 pounds, but I love that you brought this to me, and I love the way that you brought it to me. And so you know what? It's going to go on my fridge. Yes, it's jacked up, and it is not right at all. It is completely inaccurate as far as how it describes me, but my fridge will be covered with the way in which people are saying, God, I choose you. I want you. You're worth it. And so we get to, with our entire life, fill up God's fridge. So here's a couple of ways to do it, and I want to invite the band up. So out of this idea of Romans chapter 12, take your ordinary life, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work, you're walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. How do we do that? Like this. I broke the different sacrifices into potential offerings that we can have. And so there's offerings of devotion, offerings of joy and gratitude, and offerings of connectedness. And this list is not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. For offerings of devotion, our hour a day. We're reading the Bible, not so we can know more stuff, so we can know God, so we can know Jesus, so we can look through Leviticus and go, oh my gosh, Jesus, you're everywhere. I never knew you were like this. We gather each other around and we talk about how amazing God is. We go in and we actually put in a good day's work to honor God by being a good employee. That's a beautiful offering. That's a way to make the fridge. Being available for someone in need. Fasting. Yeah, so it involves spiritual disciplines that we tend to think about and all of these other ways. Some of the offerings of joy, singing and listening to music, going for a hike or for a surf sesh, writing in your journal, cooking a beautiful meal and enjoying all of the flavors, the colors, the textures, and thanking God that food actually tastes good as opposed to just keeps us alive. Going on a walk to praise him in the beauty of nature, finding God in an art gallery, finding God in an amazing novel with radical and extreme creativity, and prayers of connectedness that we pray. And we worry less about our words and we worry more on the relationship. God, do you hear my heart? We give God an offering of our time, the best parts of our day. We sing in our car, we sing at home, we sing with other people in church. We're having people over to our house to just go, God's rad, right? Yeah, he is. We get to do this. And one of the ways that we get to do it right now is through communion. And so in front of you in the chair, if you're a follower of Jesus, we'd love to invite you to participate in this act of offering right now. We're offering ourselves. We're doing an act that says, God, you're worth it and you matter. And so as you take out the cracker, in the same way that we give a grain offering, we celebrate who Jesus was in his voluntary coming. We celebrate what he did, his voluntary death and his resurrection. Thank you. And we say thank you. and with the juice. We recognize that Jesus was the perfect sacrifice, that Leviticus pointed to him the whole time, and that now we don't have to do the laborious acts of killing animals and baking bread to give away and doing all of that, because it's a requirement for us to be made right with God. We have been made right with God. And so now we get to celebrate in what he did and the ability that we have now to offer our bodies and our lives as living sacrifices. So Lord, we worship you. We thank you. We praise you. And we offer everything to you right now, with our songs, with prayers, with our minds, all of it, God.